Hello everybody, this is Dr. Novak. Welcome to my channel. Is this your first time here? You know, every once in a while you get people making comments, and I've come across at least 2 comments now of people saying, why do you call it a plenum? Why don't you call it what it really is? It's only an undergravel filter. And I've already had videos on this, but apparently we have these individuals who haven't been in the hobby very long at all, and they seem to be the know-it-alls, or we have new names for them, the Karens of the world, always butting in, telling people what they should be doing, what you're doing wrong, because they know so much. And I always had to make these videos once in a while to explain to people about undergravel filters and the correct names of things. And you know, when undergravel filters came out, they came out as tubing that you could put underneath on your bottom of your aquarium as tubing with a 1-inch uplift tube, and you just threw the gravel in there and it would carry fluids through the gravel or your substrate, and that's what they were. Then they came out with the undergravel filter plate, which they just called them undergravel filters, but they were made of plates. And these plates then sat on the bottom, and they left a void underneath the plate. Instead of just having tubing, you had this void underneath the plate, whether it be a 1/2 inch high, anywhere between a 1/2 inch to 1 inch high, it would be. And then the substrate would go on top of that. Well, that void is called a plenum. Okay, the undergravel plate is a means to achieve making a plenum. Now, it doesn't matter whether or not, as Jaubert has said, which is a professor over in France who came up with the word, just calling an undergravel filter, if you want to call it that, a plenum, because basically that's all it was. It's a plenum. It's a void underneath a plate that allows fluids to move freely and to have a high redox. And that void would be underneath the substrate. Therefore, that is called a plenum. So I know what they're coming to. Well, it's an undergravel filter. Well, undergravel filter plate, or is it a plenum? According to some, it would be called a plenum. According to other people, they like to say, well, it's nothing but an undergravel filter. But these are the same people, the same individuals who will turn around and call what they call now a biosponge, which when first invented by Jungle was called a dirt magnet. So the real name of a biosponge or sponge filter is called a dirt magnet. Do they call it a dirt magnet? I mean, really, apparently we have taken the dirt magnet and we don't want to call it dirt magnet. Why? I don't know. Is it not politically correct? And we want to now call it a biosponge. It does the same thing it did when it was first invented in the early 70s, which is it collects dirt, basically. And if you leave it in there long enough, yes, it will turn into a biological filter. But then if you leave anything in the aquarium long enough, it will turn into a biological filter. I mean, you can put a marble in your tank and it'll turn into a biological filter. Anything that you put in your tank is going to grow bacteria on it and can be constitute as a biological filter. You know, hair curlers can be put in a sump and now they can become a biological filter. Does that change the name? Now they're not hair curlers, they're bio curlers? Oh. Or you can take little plastic balls and make them out of, have an open cell and throw them in a sump, and now they're bio balls instead of just being little plastic balls that it looked like you go to an erector set. So The people insist that, oh, you're calling it the wrong name. It's nothing but an under gravel filter. Well, what's underneath the filter? That is called a plenum. Okay, that is what that is called. That's why we call it a plenum. Names change, things progress. The dirt magnet is not called a dirt magnet. It's called a biofoam. It sounds better, doesn't it? It sounds more technical, but it's just a piece of foam with water going through it that collects dirt. But that doesn't sound very good, does it, when we use the name dirt magnet? So we give it a new name. Things change, people. This is 2024. It's not called just an under gravel filter anymore. If the filter plate has a void underneath it, it's a plenum. If you make a filter yourself out of, let's say, parabolic louvers that you get at any hardware store and throw a screen on top of it and have some way to move fluids, or don't even need some way to move fluids. You can use a Jaubert method where you just throw the substrate on top of it and let fluids move through diffusion or convection or some other means, osmosis, whatever, and fluids can move. Or you can aid it with just a little bit of movement to it, just a little bit, not a lot, and it will move fluids very slowly through it into the plenum, and from the plenum, it goes to the uplift tube that goes out back into the aquarium. Times change, wording changes, but if you said under gravel filter or you say plenum, today it's the same thing. If you say dirt magnet, or if you say sponge filter, or if you say biofilter or biomechanical filter, it basically all means it's being run by a sponge and it's a dirt magnet. So I don't know why every so often I gotta explain this, but it's usually the very newcomers who think they know more than everybody else and they're going to try to correct you because they want to be the Karens of the world and tell everybody this is the right way. Well, it isn't. Get with the picture. Get with the program. Things evolve, things change, wording changes, or we may have multiple meanings for a word, or we may have multiple words for the same meaning. It's all the same. So if you want to call it an under gravel filter, go ahead. But then an under gravel filter really is one that uses tubes the way it was originally meant, where they had tubes that were laid on the bottom of an aquarium and then the substrate was just put on it. That is an under gravel filter. Now today, because we have that void, that is the plate is a means to make the void, which is called a plenum. So either way you want to say it is right, but you cannot call a filter that uses only tubes and you put the substrate on top of it a plenum. It is not a plenum. It doesn't have a void underneath the substrate. It just has tubing, suck it in water, and expelling it back in to keep fluids moving through the substrate. Which, by the way, if I remember correctly, one of the very old videos of do-it-yourself videos from a guy in Canada actually shows you how to make an under gravel filter for your aquariums in some of his older videos, where he takes tubing and makes an under gravel filter just out of tubing. Now, he is correct. That is an under gravel filter. But once you make a void underneath and the substrate sits on top of it, then what do you have? Well, you have your main body of water, your substrate, and then you have your plenum underneath it. Just putting your substrate at the bottom of an aquarium, it didn't work so good biologically. Yes, it can work if it's very thin, but it worked better if you used one of the dirt magnets, which we will call a biosponge. So that's it for this video from Dr. Novak. I hope I made that very clear and try to explain myself to you that you can call it whatever you want. You want to call it an undergravel filter, fine. You want to call it a plenum, if it has a void, fine. If it uses just tubing, it definitely isn't a plenum. It will definitely just be undergravel filter. It's your choice. So until next time, this is Dr. Novak. Thank you for watching and happy fish keeping.